Parental investment, part 3. So in this, we're talking about some of the trade-offs that parents face and some of the strategies that have evolved, the different kinds of strategies that have evolved in different organisms. We're going to continue on that and focus on commitment to young. This refers primarily to maternal commitment. Females tend to do more of the parenting, more of the care of, especially when we think of mammals, gestation, lactation, and nurturing of the young after lactation. So the question is there ever a time to abandon a pregnancy or abandon young, sacrificing them? Does this strategy ever evolve as a way to increase your reproductive fitness, right? Yeah, it turns out it does. Some animals are discriminating in terms of which young to care for, or should I abandon this pregnancy or abandon this litter of young? Let's give you some examples. So abandoning a pregnancy has been shown in a number of cases. This is an interesting one. In many species, pregnant females will have what's called a reabsorption of the embryos. The embryos are reabsorbed and the pregnancy ends. This happens in house mice, deer mice, hamsters, lemmings, voles, all these little rodent types, right? When does it happen? It happens with the arrival of a strange male. An unfamiliar male moves into the territory and the pregnancy is reabsorbed. Why? Turns out unfamiliar males in these groups of animals are infanticidal. They will kill any offspring any young in the area, not their own offspring. It will kill any young in the area when they arrive. And what that does is essentially enable the females in the area to enter or to be sexually receptive and be able to have young again more quickly. That's a strategy that males use to enhance their reproductive success. So pregnant moms have evolved the strategy of reabsorbing a pregnancy. If an unfamiliar stranger arrives, reabsorb the pregnancy. Essentially, it's a pro-choice strategy, if you will, that in which evolution has led a strategy of, hey, know when to cut your losses. Get rid of a pregnancy that is just going to be wasted because your young are going to be killed anyway. Interesting. Other researchers have found that even in primates, they don't have reabsorption of embryos, but they do have spontaneous abortions. So baboons, langurs, geladas, some other monkeys have shown spontaneous abortions when a new male arrives and starts to control an area, because in a lot of these species, males kill young in the area as well, are infanticidal. And again, this is essentially an evolutionary strategy that enhances reproductive fitness overall in females. This pregnancy isn't worth it. I'm going to wait and put my energy into my next pregnancy or my next reproductive effort. Okay? Here's an example of here's now several examples of knowing when to abandoning young, if you will. Golden hamsters, aren't they cute? Your average hamster actually comes from the wild species that live in Syria. There are a lot of species that live in the Middle East and in Europe of hamsters, but our hamsters that we see in our pet stores come from these golden hamster populations. In any case, golden hamsters are kind of interesting. They're idiroparous, but they have large litters with every reproductive effort, all right? And they, females do all the care. Males don't care at all, right? And what they'll do is they'll have a litter of young in a nest in the underground, and they'll raise those young For a few weeks, they'll be lactating, and then they grow up, right? Okay, here's what's interesting. Female hamsters have been known to adjust their litter size after the young are born. They might abandon or even eat some of their young. Not all of them, just some of them. What they tend to do is adjust their litter size to match the amount of food that's available to them. That evolutionarily makes sense. They sometimes cull the smallest or the weakest young. Again, an evolutionary strategy that works to enhance reproductive success of mom. And sometimes they'll even abandon the whole litter. Why? It's too small, apparently. The small litters are often abandoned because the effort isn't worth it, apparently. Okay? Here's another example of an animal that sometimes terminates investments, and this is discussed in our text again. I love these guys. The black-tailed prairie dogs that you see if you go out west and hang out on the Great Plains for any length of time, you'll find these guys. That picture at the bottom there is a picture that I've taken. They're just one of my favorite animals, and I would probably study them if I wanted to do my graduate school work over again. But here's what they do. These guys are cooperative breeders. They live in large colonies on prairies across the Great Plains. Their colonies are subdivided into family groups where you've got several closely related females, maybe one or two non-breeding closely related males, and then some young. And they are pretty important animals from an ecological perspective. They are what we would call keystone species even, because they essentially trim and keep the grass growth in a way so that it allows for diversity on the prairies. They're also common prey for a lot of different animals on the prairies, and they also build homes or habitats that other animals use later. Anyway, these guys have kind of an unusual breeding system. They breed in late February, early March, and they're only sexually, this is crazy, they're only sexually receptive for one day of the year, once a year. They breed, and then they give birth to young, or they give birth to their young, a month or so later. The young are born. They're born into they have smallish litters, 3 or 4 individuals in an underground nest. They're nursed there by their mom, and then once they come out of that nest, they're communally nursed by a number of females in the area, right? These close relatives, presumably, right? So here's the thing. Infanticide is common. So 39% of all litters are affected by infanticide. 25% of young produced are killed. That's a big number. We don't know exactly why infanticide happens. We're not sure, but that's not what's really interesting here. Here's what's really interesting. Something like 91% of mothers follow through with their pregnancy, the birth, and the raising of young. About 9% of mothers give birth and then terminate their investment by abandoning their young. And when they abandon their young, other animals from the group kill them via these infanticide actions. So some of the research has shown that these 9% of females who tend to abandon their young are likely to be smaller, lower weight and younger than other individuals in the group. But why are they abandoning their young? What's happening here? Well, researchers call this a gamble hypothesis. Remember, you have one chance to breed each year, right? In the spring, and that one day that you're receptive, and that's it. So females, these smaller, lower weight females might have evolved a strategy of gambling. Well, I'm going to get pregnant, invest in the pregnancy, and maybe by the time I give birth, the dominant female that's preventing me from having offspring right now, maybe she'll disappear. Maybe she'll be eaten up by a fox or something. Or maybe my odds will change. I'll get bigger and I'll be healthier and I'll be able to dominate a little bit more as I try to raise my young. But if not, I'll give birth and I'll just abandon them. I'll give up so to speak. I'll abandon sooner rather than later, because those offspring are destined to be killed if I am not dominant, if I can't take care of them. So it's kind of like, don't throw good calories at bad. Cut your losses, so to speak. That's what we think these smaller prairie dogs are doing, kind of a gambling hypothesis. Okay, what about non-human primates? Now we're getting toward us humans, right? But non-human primates, so things like gorillas and langurs and orangutans and chimps and things like that, right? Well, very rarely do non-human primates abandon a young. If it clings, I will carry it is kind of a strategy that almost all primates follow. Almost all non-human primates follow it. In other words, to love unconditionally. Animals don't seem to discriminate. These animals don't seem to discriminate based on sex or health of the animal. The animal can be sickly, the animal can be small, the animal can be a female or a male, and as long as it clings, they won't abandon it. Okay? The video that I'm going to show you is just one that I love. A while back, I think it was Nova, I'm not sure, did a spies in the wild type of series in which they put robots in the wild, and one of the robots was a langur monkey, and it was a baby monkey. And these langur monkeys, the mothers or the nurturing females were very interested in this random new baby in their lives, and so they would try to take it places and move it around, and on one of them took it up a tree and it fell because it didn't cling, and it fell, and they all thought it died, and the result is pretty interesting, so I want to show it to you. Let's see, there's information about it too, you just got to check it out. Let's see if we can watch this a minute.
In Rajasthan, the temple langurs have taken Spy Monkey into the heart of the family. But some are keen to take the budding relationship to the next level and are getting a little too familiar. One seems to want to babysit her. But disaster strikes. An injured baby is a cause for concern. And this langur seems to believe she's died. Then, something extraordinary happens. The monkeys gather round the motionless spy creature as if it is a real baby. Just as they do when their own babies die. A calm and contemplative mood descends on the...
Okay. So, in general, non-human primates tend to love unconditionally, if you will, and will only abandon their young under the direst of conditions. And maybe it's when an infanticidal male moves into the area and there's no choice but to abandon the baby and the individual is killed. Or perhaps mom's physical condition is very, very weak and abandoned the baby. But typically, primates don't abandon their babies. Now, there are some exceptions to this. The tamarins are an exception to this. There's a maybe I have that on the next slide. Nope. The mustached tamarins live in groups. They take communal care of their young. They give birth to twins regularly. And they found that occasionally tamarin mothers will abandon or kill their young under pretty dire circumstances. And the circumstances are typically when there's not enough help, when there are 2 or 3 or 4 males to help, they don't abandon. But when there's less than 2, or less than 3, they'll sometimes abandon. If other females in the group are giving birth to young at the same time, they'll sometimes abandon. Both of these reasons, or both of these situations, have been shown in the past to lead to much reduced survival rates, even when the animals are not abandoned. So this again may be a strategy of it's time to know when to abandon, to know when to stop putting effort into this pregnancy and save it for later, so to speak. It may have evolved over time. Okay, what about humans? What about humans? Do humans abandon or sacrifice young? Do females ever abandon their young? Yeah, it's actually much more common than you think over our evolutionary history, over our history. We're going to take a look at that in chapters 12 through 14. Go do some reading if this interests you. It is quite fascinating to me, and I'm sure it will be to you as well. We're much more likely than other primates, to abandon our young, or to terminate investment, if you will. We sometimes, if not terminate investment, will discriminately care for young on the basis of their health or their sex, withholding care when you've got a baby that has lower viability or has a deformity of some type, or withholding care, particularly when the baby is female. So we have what we would call contingent commitment. We don't have this unconditional commitment, more contingent or more discriminating. And the question is, how did this evolve, especially when all of our close relatives, our close primate relatives, tend to, love unconditionally? Okay, good question. We're going to take a look at that later. Oh, and are there any exceptions, though? Do we see exceptions when people should abandon, but they don't? Here's a situation that Hardy mentioned. She said there was this woman who, at age 41, had 3 marriages and 2 miscarriages, a stillborn, and got pregnant, but then found out she had leukemia. She, despite the doctor's wishes, maintained the pregnancy, gave birth, and then died. So she was self-sacrificing. She chose to have her baby and not get the treatment that she needed for leukemia. There's a woman from my parents' church who went through essentially the same thing. She was maybe 35 when she got married, and with her first child, she found out she had cancer. The doctor said, "Hey, you should terminate this pregnancy and focus on beating cancer." She refused to. She survived. She actually gave birth to, I don't know if 2 children, 3 children, I can't remember. But it's rare, right? She was essentially willing to self-sacrifice. Hardy says that exceptions like this are interesting and are more likely to occur in women who are reaching the end of their reproductive lives. A 41-year-old, a 35-year-old is a little bit different than an 18-year-old. So if an 18-year-old was told, all right, you've got to either terminate this pregnancy or not get treatment for your cancer, she'd be more likely to terminate the pregnancy. At least that's what we would predict, given evolutionary theory. And it's likely true as well. Anyway, we're not going to focus on infanticide in humans yet. We're going to do that in a later lecture. That's it for now. We'll look at one more topic in parental investment soon.